Can you see me?
I can't yet. I'm just refreshing now.
Okay.
Yes, I can see you.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, I'll get off the phone then.
Where?
Thank you, Eileen. Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Oh, yeah. Yep, you're live.
Right, fantastic. Well, this is my first time on a Go Live platform, so hello to everybody. I've got no idea how this is going to go, so please be gentle with me. And I also have my business partner who is on Zoom, but we can't work out the technology to get her to show her face. So she's got just her voice here. So say hello, Tash.
Hi, Natasha here. Sorry, there was a bit of feedback there.
All right.
Say that again.
Are you all right?
Yes. So hi, Natasha Tucker here. Yes, the other half of Anton. We're sharing a little bit about our background, Anton.
Yep. So yep. I'm Anton Ashcroft. I'm a psychologist by training. I've been working as a forensic psychologist for about 20 years, and a business and clinical psychologist in terms of my focus. I've got a private practice as well. And I've been working with complex needs for a long time, which has included ADHD, ADD, neurodiversity, and we've recently launched a business called DivernThinking, which is focused specifically on bringing a better understanding of neurodiversity to, first of all, businesses, but also supporting families and schools in becoming more aware and also more able to support people in a way that is useful to them. So that's me. What about you, Tash?
Hi, yeah, I'm Natasha Tucker. My background is learning and development in organisations, corporate space. Plus I went through the journey 6 years ago with my son, who's ADHD autistic, and in January I was diagnosed ADHD. And yes, like Anton says, passionate about educating the workplace initially, and then we see we're looking at what else we can do to help with families and schools, like Anton said. So new and interesting times for us. So I'm going to drive a little bit. We've got the questions that came up, Elaine kindly shared with us. Yep. So, but I think first, Anton, you're going to start off, we've talked about explaining a little bit what the brain is going through right now with what's going on in the environment. So is that a good place to start?
Yeah, that's, we are, as everyone knows, we are really literally in unprecedented times at the moment. We have a life that we think has a degree of predictability and normalcy, and we have a degree of control over it, and then suddenly something like this happens. And the brain is set up to be sensitive to threat. It's basically the whole original purpose of the brain was to keep us on this planet and keep us safe. So when we are in familiar territory, we're able to think clearly and problem solve effectively. But when we're in new territory, for a lot of people, uncertainty in itself can be a stressor. And lots of people have lost their jobs. Lots of people are uncertain about what's going to happen next. Lots of people have changed, even if they are working, to working from home and having to be a partner and a parent and a worker. So there's an awful lot of change that people are experiencing. And when the brain is under pressure in this way, people respond to that same pressure in different ways. But there's a helpful way of thinking about it, that for everybody, we tend to be in one of three states. And in the green brain state, this is where we are able to experience our emotions, but not get overwhelmed by them, problem solve, work out what we need, what we want, where we're going. And this is us in our best selves, if you like. But when the pressure comes, or we've got more uncertainty, or we've got rapid change that we're dealing with, we can end up getting into what's known as an orange brain state, where the emotional brain is now starting to be very sensitive to any potential dangers. And at the moment, uncertainty feels like, for many people, a really, really big danger. and it makes people feel unsafe. And when we feel unsafe, we become even more sensitive to the little threats around us. So if someone changes our routine, or if someone puts us down or criticizes us in some way, there's every likelihood that we're going to react to that more strongly than we would do otherwise. And then the final state is when our emotional selves, if you like, just take control, and our ability to think things through just goes out the window. And I don't know if anybody's been experiencing this, but this is where people can get out of control anxious, or out of control sad, or out of control angry. And this is where what's known as the fight, flight, or freeze response comes in. And again, it's literally there to keep us safe. And when we are confronted with real physical danger, it makes us either fight the danger or keep ourselves safe by running away from the danger. But when the danger is something like an uncertain future, well, we can't run away from that. And our brains are set up to keep thinking about that. So we can end up, without meaning to, keeping the anger or the frustration or the overwhelm or the anxiety going without really meaning to. So for a lot of us at the moment, we are either in an orange brain state where we've become even more sensitive to the world around us than usual, or we may even be coming out of that red brain, in and out of that red brain state where we feel as though we're really not as in control as we'd like to be.
So that's really interesting. Thinking about me as a mum, or someone at home, someone that's listening to this, how taking that down to day-to-day what they could do or be aware of, what would your suggestion be?
Well, the first thing is just to give yourself permission, if you like, almost to accept that this is where we're at, is that we're all in this boat together, and a lot of us will be starting to notice patterns to our behavior that we don't normally exhibit. Yeah. So these can be things like just noticing that your sleep's getting a bit more disturbed, or that your eating pattern has changed, or you might be getting a little bit more tearful than usual, or a little bit more irritable. And once you know that you're in an orange brain state, then there are lots of things that you can do in that moment to start to be able to keep yourself safe. So step one is to just accept this is how I'm feeling, and also to be aware that because I'm feeling this way, I'm much more likely to be sensitive to the world around me. So what can be really helpful is to reduce that stimulation from around you. So if you're someone who knows that you're quite sensitive to noise, it's, how can you create a calming environment? If you know that you might be more sensitive to being criticized, it's like, well, which people are you able to have a conversation with who are likely to be more supportive of you and less critical? How can you maintain connections with people who you feel will be on your side rather than making you feel worse about yourself, which you're going to be very sensitive about?
Right, that's helpful. And by the way, people, if you have questions, please put them on the comments in there, and I am looking at that and feeding them back to Anton as well. So Anton, thinking about some of the questions that we, Autism New Zealand, got, one of them here was, how can we adapt to this change and the change once New Zealand comes out of lockdown?
That's a really good question, because it may sound almost counterintuitive at the moment, but we are still in and I hate to use the word, but it does make sense, or the phrase, the honeymoon period of the lockdown. Because at the moment, people are sort of feeling that, well, we know we're locked down for 4 weeks. We've got a degree of certainty about that. We know that we are going to be changing how we work and our roles at home. And so we can focus on stuff to do. The problem is, as this person has rightly picked up on, is that this is not an event that is going to suddenly disappear after 4 weeks. This is an event that is probably going to have an impact on our society, if not for the foreseeable future, then certainly for the next 12 to 18 months. And we almost go through a grief cycle when we have such significant and disruptive changes. So at the moment, we're almost in that denial/numbness stage where we don't quite get how important this moment in history is. And then as we start to realize that, we can experience a sense of loss and grief for the world that was, and our work if we've lost our job, or the way in which we've had to change things. But then after the sadness, we can then start to get angry and frustrated that it doesn't seem fair or it doesn't seem right, that what's happening is happening. And that's, again, a very normal, natural reaction. And then the final set is where we start to, as this person's already starting to think about really, is how do we settle in to that new way of life? The difficulty with that question is that it's very hard to think about how do we adapt to this new world when we don't know what the new world is going to look like. So in answer to that question, what I'd encourage people to do is to really, if you like, know that this is coming, and at the time, for the time being, saying, but we know what is going to happen for the next 4 weeks, or the next 2 weeks rather, I think we're at now. So it's more about how do I set up my systems and routines that will allow me to stay in that green brain state over the next couple of weeks while I know what's happening. And at the same time, being able to say, and after that 2 weeks, I know that there's going to be another period where I'm going to need to start to think about maybe changing how I approach things or changing what I do in order to manage myself a bit better. But think about that too early on, when you haven't got enough knowledge about what's going to happen next. That's something that can really promote anxiety.
Yeah, okay. And is there like a child's version of that, thinking of my son?
Yeah, absolutely. So the child's version is, I mean, especially if you've got someone with ASD, you are likely to be in a position where that for that person, the change in routine is going to be even more profound, and threatening and uncomfortable. So the best thing that we can do as a parent is to be able to start to set up in collaboration with that young person, if they're at the age where they can do that, is to identify how do I set up a safe, structured daily routine where we know what's happening, we know why it's happening, we know how it's going to happen, we know when it's going to happen, and ideally, even if there's some sort of visual cue to help structure that routine and structure that day.
Yeah, I must admit, with our kids, we've got a whiteboard and we've adapted it each day to go what worked well, what didn't work well, where are their energy levels, and if it falls apart, to go, okay, we're all human, let's have a look at it again tomorrow.
Exactly, because the other bit of it is that change takes time. So to impose a whole new routine is going to be very threatening. So it's quite good in a sense that we've got the Easter holidays, and I would again encourage people to parents to allow the Easter holidays to be Easter holidays. So see it as a break where you can do things in the home, but do them for fun, and create play to people's interests. You know, if they like doing art, let's do some art. If they like doing baking or cooking, let's do that. Let's do something that people enjoy, that they see it as a pleasurable activity. And then as we get towards the end of the Easter holidays, that's the time where it can be really helpful to start to introduce some of these, if you like, school routines that you might have at home, but introduce them slowly and in a way that the what, why, how, and when is clearly explained so that it doesn't feel too threatening.
And when you say introduce slowly, what might slowly look like?
So slowly might be, for example, having a specific time to get up and have breakfast. The next step might be a specific time to go to bed. The next step might be to have, okay, from 10 until 11, we're going to do some art. The next step might be from 3 until 4, we're going to do some maths by doing some weighing of cake mixture or something. So it's almost like, what can I do in the home that is fun and normal home activities, but I can also link in some way to education.
Yeah, okay. And part of what I've found is like sometimes the afternoon we do the burn energy time because I've got 2 boys.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, is that it's really helpful to set up a structure where you've got that sort of combination of downtime, a transition into activity, and then another transition into another sort of more focused mental time again.
Okay, great. So one of the questions we had was, have a 12-year-old girl who who does work at school and is active at school.
Yeah.
But since the lockdown, we can hardly get her to go for a walk or get her out of the bedroom. She just wants to be on technology and draw, and can't get her to even look at a bit of work from school.
Yeah.
What sort of suggestions might you have for that?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't worry too much. Is that's a very predictable and normal pattern of behaviour. It's probably a coping response to the change that's happening. We all go to a place where we feel safe when we feel unsafe, and for a lot of children, I know that gaming is a place where people feel safe and more in control. The other thing that sounds very hopeful and helpful is that this person also mentioned that their daughter is still interested in art and drawing.
Yeah.
So what I would suggest is that rather than feel worried about the fact that she's not doing schoolwork, it might be better to sort of, if you like, shape the drawing behavior, because that's already a path of least resistance, if you like. How can you maximize that in such a way that you're doing it together or doing it alone if she prefers to do it alone, but do it in such a way that it feels purposeful and helpful for both of you, rather than feeling she's not doing schoolwork, she needs to do schoolwork. And especially for the Easter holidays, I'd say that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Another question was, how do we cope with someone who is dealing with extremely high anxiety?
Again, a great question, because there'll be a lot of people who are experiencing that at the moment. And it is distressing as a friend or a parent or a colleague to see someone else in such an anxious state. And it may sound obvious, but often we can end up worrying about their worry. And if someone is very worried, to have someone worried about our worry is not helpful, even though we feel as though we're caring. So what they need from us, if you like, is to be that more of that emotional rock. And the first step is just to completely normalize the worry. I mean, the worry is not there for unreasonable means. I mean, given what's happened at the moment, we don't know what the future holds. This is something that people haven't experienced in their lifetime. There is a lot of uncertainty, so therefore a degree of anxiety is really normal. And one of the very interesting things about all emotions is that if we simply talk about emotions without judgment, and someone hears what we're saying, in other words, they listen to understand rather than listen to respond or listen to dismiss, that in itself has a cathartic effect. And what that means is it increases the parasympathetic nervous system, so that calms us down. So just simply the act of talking through your anxiety with someone who is there for you and with you in itself can start to reduce some of that anxiety.
So it's a little bit like when you share something with your husband and he tries to fix it and you're like, just listen.
Yes. I don't want a solution. I just want you to hear how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
The other thing that can be really, really helpful with someone who's experiencing strong anxiety is to help them refocus on, rather than the stuff that is, because worry comes from a sense of powerlessness often. We're fearful about an uncertain future, or we're fearful about not being able to manage ourselves in a helpful way. So what can be useful is to move from what's known as the circle of concern to the circle of influence and control. In other words, it moves away from what's the big picture that I have no control over. We can't control what happens in the whole country to COVID-19, for example, but you can control how you wash your hands, or how you connect with people, or what supports you're seeking out. So there are lots of things that we can think, feel, and do in ourselves that give us a sense of control back again. And when we have that sense of control, no matter how small, that also can help our anxiety response.
Yeah. And maybe it's also how much social media or press you watch where it's all about it, which is a bit challenging too.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's absolutely fine to look at the media and identify what's going on, but there is a point at which that can fuel anxiety and make things worse. So it's about structuring it. So, maybe I'll just look at the media for an hour a day rather than every 10 minutes to find out what's changed. So that's a really good point.
Okay, great. Next question was, what can we do to keep people stimulated? Usually we go to the park, but cannot do this at the moment.
Yeah. It's really it's fascinating that we have a brain that gets hardwired into habits. And when we can't do our habits, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I go for a run, or I go and visit a friend at this point. As soon as our habits are challenged, we can sometimes feel a bit stuck. But what I've noticed on YouTube, and I'm sure many other people have as well, is that there's an awful lot of people doing an awful lot of really creative and exciting and stimulating things at home. I mean, the things I've seen, for example, is I'm sure that everyone's seen, or some people may have seen the people in Wellington, the family in Wellington who did the COVID-19 song, where they devised a dance, and they did the video, and they did the song as well. So that was amazing. So what can I do at home art wise? What can I do at home music wise? What can I do at home? I've also seen someone had done a physical assault course, where they weren't allowed to touch the floor, and it went through 3 or 4 different rooms. So there's lots and lots of things that we can do at home. And if you're stuck for ideas, just have a look on YouTube, because there are lots of examples on YouTube.
Okay, great. The next question that we had from earlier in the week was, how do we support adults and children if they need to go to the hospital during this time?
Well, yes. I mean, one of the things that can be useful is just to prepare someone, because they may be quite fearful about going out. I know I've worked with some people who are now getting more uncomfortable with the idea of being in places where there are other people around. At the moment, at this precise moment, the hospitals are actually quite quiet. But what might be useful is to ring up the hospital and say, well, if I bring someone in, what would be the procedure compared to normal? What can I expect? And then whoever you're bringing to hospital, you can explain in advance, this is what's going to happen. This is what to expect. This is how long the wait's going to be. Let's get some puzzles or games or something to fill in the time whilst we're waiting, just so that it becomes a known event rather than jumping into the unknown, which can create that anxiety.
Yeah, and I guess if I was taking my son to something like that, it would build my anxiety not to know in advance, which he would feed off as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Okay, another question. What can I do to help with learning and development at the moment?
Well, I think we sort of covered that a bit before anyway. Yeah. Where we want to get someone to in the medium term, assuming that the lockdown goes longer than the Easter holidays, is to be able to create a structured day that's centered around sort of educational components. But I wouldn't worry too much about specifically having to do the homework assignments that school would normally set. This is a wonderful opportunity to be able to create learning at home. And there's so much learning that you can do at home. As we said before, like baking needs maths. You can do physical activity at home. You can go for a walk when you're going out for your daily walk and start looking at what trees are out there, or take a book, or be able to get access to the internet. So you can have conversations that are focused on education rather than just on small talk.
Great. Okay. And last question we had in advance, although I see there's some online, which we'll go to next, is how can I keep my child interested in school whilst in lockdown? It's quite a focus, isn't it? School, understandably.
It makes complete sense. I mean, I would say, again, we have to be really kind in this time, both to ourselves and other people. It isn't reasonable to expect that we will do things exactly as we always have done. And there will be a period of transition. So as we said before, it is about moving to a point of a structured daily routine, but don't try and put in too much of a structure and too rigid a structure too quickly. So this, as I said before, this Easter period is a really good opportunity to build it up nice and slowly, and think about if as a parent, think about, well, what do I want my kids to learn whilst they're here? This is a great opportunity for them maybe to be exposed to things that really are of value for you from an educational point of view. You might have an interest in, I don't know, the Roman Empire, or dinosaurs, or there may be something that you have a passion with that you might be able to share with your child in a way that you don't normally.
Nice. Okay, thank you. We have a question online from Belinda.
Yeah.
My ASD daughter lives by herself. She's gone through saying that she's not coping, and I've tried to get help, but not really getting it. What can you recommend?
It depends what level of concern that you have. If you say that she's not coping, there are support services that are out there. There are the online support services that she might be able to call and have a confidential conversation. And also, if you're really concerned about the risk, then there are acute services that you can contact who will go over and even in these days will visit her. If she says that she's not coping, the best thing that you can do is be there with her, if you like, and not try and fix it, but be there to listen and just say, tell me more. What's going on for you? What are you noticing that's different? And if you go into fix it mode too early, which we often want to do when we're caring for people, it goes back to that person not just not feeling heard.
Yeah, and a little bit, it's helpful for me when I think of that to think of when hubby goes into fix it mode, it kind of takes me into red brain. It's like, just be quiet and listen.
Yeah. The other thing that I would really encourage you to do, if she gets to the point where she's saying, well, what can I do? Then she's asking for help. And that's a time where just thinking, again, it's that focus back onto the circles of control and influence rather than the circles of concern. It's to say, well, what is within your home that you can focus on that gives you a sense of safety? So it may be my wife, for example, she copes by knitting.
Yeah.
There are lots of people who have a safety behavior that they can revert to, that they can make part of their day, that will give them some respite from the feelings of overwhelm that they've got. The other thing, as we've said before, is about just stepping back from the media if that's the thing that is making you feel as though you're not coping.
Okay, great. There's another question. I'm not sure if you know on this or not. Can I use my respite carer support during this time for devices? I
don't quite know what they mean by devices.
Yeah, I'm assuming that it's online devices. So is that a question maybe that can be passed on to Elaine?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one.
Okay. Another question is, how can I manage meltdowns when I want to keep peace in an already stressed out environment of being locked down?
Yes, this is all too familiar, and it's really tough because we are under each other's skin, and just by that mere fact, no matter how much we love our family, there are flashpoints and tension points. This is absolutely inevitable and completely predictable. So the first thing is just don't tell yourself off for the fact that this happens, and also that you're having a reaction too, because that just makes your own reactions feel worse. If you're living with guilt and shame, that just makes management even more difficult. The next thing to think about is that if someone else is having a meltdown, is just from a practical point of view, how do you keep them safe? The worst thing that you can ever say to someone if someone is having a meltdown is calm down, because that's invalidating the emotions that they are experiencing in that moment. From a validating point of view, what can be better is to notice the emotion that they're experiencing. I can see you're really angry.
Okay.
The other thing with meltdowns is that if you don't fuel the meltdown tends to reduce over time. There are also, depending on the age of the child, distraction techniques can be quite useful as well. If someone you know likes a certain type of food, you can distract them by saying, well, let's come over here and let's have a cup of tea and a cookie or something. But the biggest thing is that if someone is in that red brain state, trying to talk them down is probably not going to have an effect, but it's gently standing back, letting them know that you're there for them. And once you see that they're more in that orange brain state, that's when you can start to have a bit more of those distracting or supportive conversations.
And how might we recognise what might we see or hear when they're in the different states, so that we know what it is we're encountering?
Yeah, so if you're noticing someone in an orange brain state, so a green brain state is that they will be fine and happy. An orange brain state is where you might start to notice that it's called perseverating. So they might start to over-focus on something, become very obsessed by it. That can be a coping mechanism as well, but it's showing that there may be a degree of anxiety sitting underneath that. Jumping on words or challenging an opinion. Withdrawing can also be a sign. It depends on the type of child that you've got. So it can be, you will have someone who will either show the early warning signs of a fight response, so that's movement towards whatever they're feeling challenged by, or you'll see someone who has an early warning sign of a flight response, so they'll be shutting down or removing themselves from that challenging situation. Or you can find someone who gets stuck. That's the freeze response, where they just seem a bit numb or a bit unresponsive. And the best thing you can possibly do is notice those early warning signs and work with those rather than it escalate up to a meltdown. But again, going back to what I said earlier, meltdowns, because of the change in circumstances and the change in routines, that in itself can be enough just to trigger a meltdown.
Okay, great, thank you. There is a question here around gaming being essential. I think that's from Mary. I think that's feels like that's probably more of a long-term, maybe Autism New Zealand, or not so much something that we can help with. But a great question.
It's a great observation. I mean, it's I think that Jacinda has already talked about the challenge about what is essential and what is not essential, and for certain groups, I mean, I would completely agree that my son with ASD, his safe place is when he's Dungeon Master.
Yep. Okay, we have Katrina has made comment, I just don't think we've got enough support or things we need to thread.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah. And this is the it's completely normal to have these thoughts and feelings, and they are absolutely right. The challenge is that when we focus, this is what we call that's an example of an area of concern. Completely correct observation. The problem is that when we focus on what we can't control or we can't change, that tends to fuel our anxiety even further.
Yeah, agreed. Been through that. Rachel, lots of coming back and playing hands. I understand that's a good habit. Do I leave Mr. 14 to it or intervene?
That's probably a sign of orange brain behaviors.
Which means again.
So what might be useful is, rather than focusing on the unwanted behavior, to focus on the emotions that may be sitting underneath it, and find out more about, what's going on, how are they feeling, what support do they need from you, how can you help, offer some distractions of other activities that might interfere. So if they're physical activities where you can't wash your hands or bite your nails, that could be useful. But don't focus on the behavior itself, because that will feel threatening.
Okay, and so is that quite a key theme then from what you've said? It's around not, because we all see behaviours, and I guess the challenge is if you're working full-time while trying to have your kids in the background doing stuff, it's an added complex.
It is, but, definitely, yes.
So how do we, it's around what might be creating these things, noting when things happen and what happens right before them, or, what else do you suggest there?
Yeah. It's what you're alluding to is a very, very helpful way of understanding behavior, because all behavior has a function. So rather than try and tackle the unwanted behavior, the first step, as you rightly say, is to understand that behavior. What is the function of that behavior? What is the very good reason that person is now choosing to behave in that way? And then you can work with the source of the problem rather than the consequence of the problem. The other thing that can be really, really helpful is what's known as shaping behavior. In other words, it's catching people whilst they're good.
Yeah, and what does that look like?
So, for example, if someone is shouting and screaming and then they get quiet for a moment and start to refocus, then you can notice the refocusing and say, that's fantastic. I could see that you were upset and you were able to settle yourself and you've refocused on that task. That's well done. That's brilliant.
Yeah, okay. And I think part of what we talked about the other day was, as much as this lockdown is challenging, if there's behaviours that we can work with, and I know, everyone's different and there's different situations and scenarios, behaviours, but there's a 3-week opportunity if we see the glass half full, that we could try and work on behaviours in quite a, a focused approach, without having school interfering or other people doing stuff that isn't helping.
Yes.
What could be helpful? Because I know in the past, when things have become hard for us as a family, when you're in it and you're constantly doing it and it's Groundhog Day and you feel like you're just going bonkers.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point as well. The first thing that we need to do is, we're not going to be able to help other people unless we can help ourselves first. So if you'll find that if you're in a strong orange or a red brain state, you need to find a way of negotiating with your partner or anyone who's around with you that your need to take a break, your need to be able to look after yourself is really important, because when you're looking after yourself well, you are in a much more green brain state, which would enable you to then more helpfully look after others.
Okay, great. And thinking is.
I've just seen one of those that we answered. Someone said the son is 5, way lower.
Yeah.
So a younger child.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So the first thing is, if someone is having a meltdown, again, is to try and see if there's a pattern. Try and work out what's happening beforehand, because they may not at that age be able to explain it to you, but there will be a very good reason. We always behave how we behave for a good reason. So if you can try and work out what some of those triggers are, you can then start to address some of those triggers. The other thing is that when someone is in that meltdown phase, I don't know if you've got strategies that you've managed meltdowns in the past just to keep that person safe. Whatever you've done in the past that has kept that person safe, or you've done in the past that is a habit or a routine, is stick to that if it's working. Make the meltdown feel, it may sound bizarre, but safe to have that meltdown, rather than it feeling even more threatening when you're in meltdown mode.
Yeah, okay. And is another helpful thing, like something I try and do, is to reflect with hubby at the end of the day, to go, what worked well, what didn't, what that we weren't aware of, and even trying to note down different stuff so I can start to see patterns or trends.
Absolutely. Yeah, really, really helpful. Every behaviour has a cause. I've just noticed that Naomi has said, my son is stimming way more at the moment. Again, completely predictable. Very, very likely that a lot of people will be using their coping mechanisms to try and keep themselves feeling safe. So the stimming itself is not the issue. It's more about what's the emotion that's sitting underneath that, and how do we help someone either distract themselves from it or make connection with that in a safe way.
Yep. Okay, great. I think it looks like we've answered all the questions. Is there anything else or techniques that come to mind for, like the top 3 things maybe that people could have front of mind when stuff happens, that comes to mind for you? Or
yes, I would say prevention is better than management.
As in?
So in other words, the more you can pick up on early warning signs and work with that, the better.
Yeah.
I think absolutely at this moment in time, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, even though it can be tough. It's that expression of gratitude, being able to work with what you appreciate about yourself and what you appreciate about the people around you, even though it might be a challenge to think of those sometimes. It's because, again, it puts your brain in a different state. It puts it in a reward state rather than a threat state. And the final piece of advice would be to develop consistency and structured, clear routines, but not just what the routines are about, but why you're doing them, what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how to transition from one activity to another in a way that is signposted.
Okay, that's for the individual who
Yeah.
you're doing it with.
Yeah.
And when you say that, is there top tips on that? Because I mean, that in itself sounds good. Is there key
Yeah.
ways that you do that well?
Yeah. So if you're noticing, well, first of all, if you're trying to notice early warning signs, what can be useful is just to start to keep a reflection diary or keep a journal to hand. And when you're noticing, it's not noticing at the point of disruption. It's noticing, well, I know. So he was playing for 15 minutes and he seemed okay, and then he went out into the garden, and then he seemed a bit more distracted, and then something happened. So you're starting to notice just what people are doing and saying and how they appear to be, rather than going, I've got the assumption that it's this, so I'm going to look for that. So it's just looking for patterns by looking at observable actions, how they appear to be emotionally, and what they appear to be saying. And if you're really wanting to try and find out the detail of what's going on, and meltdowns are happening quite regularly, it can be useful to do that, say, every hour or so.
Okay. Great. I see Joshua asked, any tips for keeping notes or collecting data to pick up on those patterns?
Yeah, that's what I was basically saying. So yeah, keep a journal. Don't try and hypothesize too early. Just notice what's going on for the people. Oh, sorry. There you go.
Okay, great. And I see Naomi's put on there that Sensory Sam is still shipping online orders. They have a great range of sensory items. So
yeah, and that's fantastic. That is being able to get some sensory safety, and as I said, for my wife, knitting is one of those. That's a really, really useful thing just in the short term to keep people out of that orange brain state or managing their orange brain state.
And does that feed into as well where you talked earlier about the art, someone liking art, and if that's the thing that works for them? So, because with my boys, we've got a list of 5 things indoors. When they go, I'm bored, mummy, we can go, right, let's have a look at the list.
Yeah.
What on here? And that's worked really well for us. 5 things indoors and 5 things outdoors that they love doing. So instead of me always having to find something for them, A, they've found it, shared it, but B, they can do it.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, it's really useful because that way it's negotiated and it's known. It's not a new thing that you're introducing, which in itself could be quite threatening.
Yeah, that comes from them. Okay, I don't think there's any more questions that I can see on there. I don't know if you've seen any that I haven't.
No, I think that's all seen there.
Any last word for everyone out there in lockdown in New Zealand?
Well, yeah, I would say that we've said it before. I'll say it again, though. This is a time to be kind to yourself and kind to others. And if you're coming from that place, that in itself can help you manage some of the stress just a little bit more easily.
Yeah, we're all human, aren't we?
Yeah.
Even our kids, which sometimes we may forget.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. This was a bit of a trial. I think it went relatively well. It felt like it did. Anton, a couple of, yep. If this appeals to do again, or you've got questions with his calm that he had, just let Elaine know or put on there. And I think Autism New Zealand have more things planned for the rest of the month. And from my end, take care of yourselves, be safe, and if you need to remove yourself from anyone else in the house, then just listen to yourself and do it.
Absolutely. You cannot care for others unless you're caring effectively for yourself. And as Natasya said, we are very happy if people are interested. If they've got more questions, happy to do this again.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. And take care.
Yes. All right. Bye.
Bye.